Well, it's no doubt that the Nigerian 2023 election will be very intense, but there are fears of violence and threats to the peaceful conduct of the exercise. A new report from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change has called on Nigerian authorities and their international partners to take urgent action to ensure that next February elections to choose the next president and the vice president, those of the Senate and the House of Representatives and the governorship and House of Assembly elections later on in March are secure and credible. The report, which was released today, titled Democracy Under Threat, Why the Security Risk to Nigeria's 2023 Elections Must Not Be Overlooked, warns that the elections are under threat of serious disruption from violence caused by Boko Haram, the indigenous people of Biafra, secessionist group, and criminal gangs known as bandits, as well as from political thuggery and disinformation and fake news spread by social media platforms, which could fan the embers of insecurity while undermining the integrity of election campaigns. The author of the Democracy Under Threat for the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, Mr. Bulama Bukati, a senior fellow at the Tony Blair Institute for Extremism Policy Unit. He joins us live from London. Thank you so much, Mr. Bukati, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, great. Let's get to it because it's quite a read. If you look at that report number, it's about 23 pages, that the report that you have prepared, and which looked extensively at all the possibilities that could cause violence in 2023 elections. Basically, you have said that there are three major groups in Nigeria that the government needs to look at. You named IPOB and the ESN, which is tagged as a militant wing of the group. You mentioned Boko Haram and you mentioned bandits. These are the groups that you have mentioned as the possible threats to our elections. Give us a summary of what that report means in respect of these three groups.
Sure, Sheun, and they are one of the acute threats to the election, as you rightly pointed in the introduction. These three groups will in different ways seek to disrupt Nigeria's election, and they might cause serious disruption if urgent action is not taken. For example, in the case of Boko Haram, one of the Boko Haram's articles of faith, or one of the pillars of Boko Haram's ideology, is rejection of democracy and their vow to disrupt or destroy Nigeria's democracy. And they have attempted it in the past, in 2011, in 2019, and they will make the same effort in 2023. In 2011, for example, Boko Haram successfully forced us to delay our elections by 6 weeks, if you remember, when our security forces and intelligence agencies declared that they could not guarantee the security of voters and election officials in the Northeast, and therefore the election had to be postponed. In 2019, they attempted to disrupt the elections in Yobe and Maiduguri and in Gombe State. And now we know that this group has expanded, as you and I have discussed previously, to the Northwest and the North Central, and they are able to launch attacks now in southern Nigeria, which is unprecedented in the history of the group. Boko Haram is going to make more efforts in 2023 to disrupt our elections. Now, IPOB, on its part, picked up arms in December of 2020. And we know that it is therefore a new security threat that has emerged since the 2019 elections. Now, IPOB in particular has between October 2020 and June 2021 attacked 19 different INEC facilities, and they have done more in the past few months. So IPOB has been attacking the Eastern Security Network, some people call them the unknown gunmen, have been deliberately and systematically attacking INEC, destroying vital or critical election infrastructure and materials, and that is going to undermine INEC's capacity to go on with the election if things continue the way that they are. Bandits, on the other hand, have expanded as well and have also grown in lethality and sophistication since the last election. And we know that bandits may not deliberately try to disrupt the election, but they may abduct election officials to extort ransom. We know that some of the rural areas in the Northwest and the North Central are under the control of bandits. And these bandits might try to stop elections in those areas unless money is paid to them, as they now ask farmers to pay them taxes and stuff like that. So this is, in summary, how we think these three groups might affect the credibility and security of the 2023 elections.
All right, so let me ask, these groups that you have mentioned, the non-state actors and their armed groups, is there any particular reason that suggests that they might rev up their activities, or there might be any significant activities of these groups leading to the elections?
Yes, like I told you, Boko Haram has historically stepped up attacks every time there was an election. In 2019, they launched attacks in Maiduguri, on the Maiduguri airport, on the day of election in the morning, and they targeted election materials because they know that election materials are brought to Maiduguri through the airport and even to Yobe State. So they wanted to destroy the materials. If they had succeeded, there wouldn't have been election in Maiduguri and Yobe. And if you had two states without an election, you might end up declaring the presidential election inconclusive, and that's going to cause lots of political havoc in the country. As for IPOB, like I told you, we have been over 20 attacks deliberately targeting INEC offices and facilities by the Eastern Security Network. But we have also seen a video released in April of this year in which four IPOB militants clearly said there would be no elections in 2023 if their leader Nnamdi Kanu is not released. And so these are clear attempts they have been making. As for the bandits, like I told you, there may not be targeted or deliberate attempt by them, but their activities is going to make it impossible to deploy election officials to some of the communities of the Northwest and the North Central. And we know that about 1 million election workers will be traveling on our highways and in the Nigerian waters. And we know that many of these highways are places that suffer recurrent bandit attacks. You remember that last year when bandits abducted 1,000 school children and their teachers in 8 different operations, they said they abducted the students because the students are connected with the government. Now, you can easily then abduct election officials on the same premise because the government will be disturbed and they want to force the government to negotiate, and therefore they are likely to target election officials to extort ransoms and other concessions.
So there is another part, a trend which you've shown in that report. You target the lives lost to election violence in Nigeria since independence in 1960. One that is very worrying is that of 2011, where we saw a spike about 800. And perhaps also worrying is the report given by INEC and security agencies that since the election campaigns kicked off, over 50 activities leading to violence have been noted by authorities in the last 2 weeks. Now, that is worrying, isn't it? And if you look at the trend, it increased in 2019 compared to 2015. Are you worried, or are there indications that there might be a possible spike based on the reports of the over 50 violent incidents that have happened in the campaign so far?
Absolutely, absolutely. Political thuggery or post-election violence is a very big concern. And as you said, if you just looked at 1999 to date, we have lost 1,525 Nigerians to election, at least 1,525 Nigerians. And the least we recorded in any election in the last 5 elections is 100 people. So you can say for the last 5 election cycles, Nigeria loses at least 100 people to election-related violence. This is unacceptable in a democracy. It is something that must be stopped. But when you look at 2019 as against 2015, like you said, there were 165 people that were lost in the 2019 elections. And we are afraid, we are worried that the 2023 election is likely to look more like the 2011 elections, when 800 people were killed, property worth billions of naira were destroyed, and 65,000 people were displaced as a result of post-election riots. The signs show that 2023, unfortunately, may look more like 2011. And if that happens, then we are going to lose hundreds of people. We have to work to stop that situation from happening. But as you noted, there have already been recorded about 50 violent activities. And some reports say 20 people have already lost their lives to violent election campaigns in this season. And this is 86 days before the elections. If things continue this way, we are going to see more and more and more people killed, more property destroyed, and democracy is not war. Election is not war. Countries around the world do organize elections, and they do them peacefully and smoothly, and Nigeria has got to do that. We cannot afford to continue to lose people, but the signs are unfortunately worrying as it is today.
Now, one of the areas that you touched on are those Nigerians that may not have their domain that are, of course, indigenous to them, and those are the people that are displaced. And you've also highlighted the astronomical increase in the internally displaced persons in Nigeria since 2017. How that will impact on the election, I'd like you to just mention in just less than a minute.
Sure. So there are currently about 3.2 million Nigerians that are displaced from their homes. And you know, by our laws, they can Nigerians can only vote in their polling unit of registration. And these people registered before 2019, today they have been displaced. So they may not be able to elect their candidates. But INEC has introduced the IDP voting centers. Unfortunately, these centers are only located in IDP camps, and most of the over 1 million IDPs in the Northwest and the North Central are based in communities, not in IDP camps. So they will not be able to exercise their franchise if nothing is done from now to the election. And that's why we called on INEC to introduce a system that will allow IDPs to cast their vote. Remember, showing that Nigeria's 2019 election was won by less than 4 million votes, and the 2015 election was won by less than 3 million votes. And you have 3.2 million IDPs displaced from their communities. So this number is going to make a big difference to the election, to the election outcome, and therefore these IDPs, there should be a transparent system to allow them to vote wherever they might be in the country.
Bulama, let's wrap up this conversation quickly. Unless I'd like you to, because you and your group, you've worked on the possible solution. We've talked about the problems. We've talked about the risk and the threats towards the 2023 elections. Well, I personally wouldn't want anybody to stay at home not to vote. We want all Nigerians to go all out, because this, according to, based on what we saw in the South Africa World Cup, this is our time. This is the time of the average Nigerian to decide for themselves. So they need to exercise their franchise. But if the authorities can take their pen and paper and probably glean from the knowledge based on your research, what are those solutions that you have highlighted in this report quickly?
No, this is a very important question. There are 11 recommendations we made in the report. And for those of us who would want to read the report, it's on the Tony Blair Institute website. You can see all the 11 recommendations. I will just mention a few because of time. Number one, we called on Nigeria's security forces and intelligence agencies to step up efforts to liberate areas that are currently under the control of Boko Haram or bandits, or where IPOB or the Eastern Security Network is operating. This is very important so that communities will be able to vote. Number two, we call on the Nigerian government to prosecute election violence offenders. You said on the top of your program, you reported that the National Security Advisor warned those who are behind election violence or political thuggery. His statement is fundamental. It is coming at the right time, but he needs to do more than a statement. Action speaks louder than voice, and therefore we should see example. 20 people have already reportedly been killed in this circle. The National Security Advisor and our security forces should work to detect those who perpetrated these crimes and prosecute them before a court of law, so that will deter others. We have also called on the media, and this is a great work you are already doing, Shaun, as well as other journalists. We have called on the media and civil society to fight fake news and disinformation, because we know that social media is contributing to unrest in our country. We have also called on traditional rulers, religious leaders, imams and pastors to work against the manipulation of religion for political purposes, because we know that some unscrupulous politicians do that. Finally, we have called on the international community to understand the importance of this election and the threat this election is facing, and to stand with Nigeria and to send a clear message that election violence will not be tolerated, will not be accepted by the international community. Maybe the last thing the international community should do is to continue to support Nigeria's media, journalists and civil society to continue to sensitize and educate Nigerians to help us achieve peaceful, secure, and credible elections come 2023.
Bulama Bokati, my good friend, thank you so much indeed for your time there. The lead researcher in the new report that came from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, Bulama Bokati, there from London for us. Thank you so much indeed for your thoughts.
I am so impressed at the level of research you did into this report. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.